The media's been focused on the NFL in the last few weeks, but it isn't sport that's on the agenda. It's domestic violence and violence in general with some of the league's star players. Domestic abuse is something that Tanya Young Williams knows all too well, and in the response to the recent furore, she has written a blog, Domestic Violence 101 and You Are OK Survival Kit. And Tanya joins us now. Tanya, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Great to have you. Sorry, it's under a very difficult subject matter, of course, but let's start off with domestic violence. Obviously, domestic violence, domestic abuse is something very close to you. Why did you decide to take on this cause?
Well, I was a victim of domestic violence, and I actually went on a program on CBS a few years ago, and I was speaking, as I oftentimes do, about high-profile situations. And behind my head was a sign that said domestic violence. And I'd been in it so long, I didn't really understand that I was a victim. And once I left that show, I had no choice to share my story and help others similarly situated.
And in terms of, your own story, obviously you were, you're still married, though estranged, with the pro basketball star Jayson Williams. Talk to me about your relationship. What were the dynamics that made it abusive?
Well, Jayson and I had a relationship that began in college, but we went through a very high-profile aggravated manslaughter trial that lasted from the beginning to appeals for 8 years, and that's very difficult on any marriage. However, the times at that point weren't bad. It was once the trial was over that he began to feel bad about himself. He couldn't get a job, he hated his life, and you often find times with abusers, it's when they're in their lowest places that they act out and they become violent. And with him, it became violent. It was an abuse of alcohol, prescription drugs, and it showed itself in very violent ways.
It was interesting the way that you talked about, obviously, children being concerned. I mean, does that feed into part of the reason why some people feel uncomfortable about coming forward? Maybe their abuser is, as it was for you, a husband, it could be a spouse, it could be, another kind of loved one. I mean, do familial ties make it more difficult to report an abuser?
Well, I think so. I think as mothers, we are nurturing beings, and our primary concern is for the well-being of our children. And when we are in situations that are harmful to ourselves, we put that to the side because we want our children's welfare and how a child thinks about their family dynamic. You don't want to cause any disruption to that. So oftentimes we will act like nothing's going on so that our children think they have a normal life. And the reality is children know what's going on, even if they don't understand it. One thing I try to explain to other people is that don't do what I did, because a lot of the things I dealt with, handled on my own, was because in my mind it was for the sake of the children. But as my children have grown up, I realized the best thing you can do for your children is to be happy and to be safe. And if you have an opportunity to get out of harm's way, to live a life that's full of purpose, and get out of that abusive relationship.
If you just had a sort of one piece of wisdom you'd want to impart to anybody, male or female, that's watching that may be a victim of domestic abuse or domestic violence, what would it be? What would you want them to know?
You must love yourself more than you love the abuser. Your life is worth living, and domestic violence can lead to death. Don't make life that it's just a hit, or it's just slap, or it's just harmful words. If someone tells you something enough and it hurts your feelings enough, you can commit suicide. So that's no less than someone who gets killed by their abuser. Domestic violence is a life and death situation. Take it seriously. Love yourself enough to live.